never let it be said that the German bishops, they're not courageous. Never let it be said. Because it takes a certain level of gumption and courage to be absolute hypocrites, blatantly so, on the world stage for all to see. We have this ongoing story of the church being politicized against the American government. Weird how this is playing out, but it should not surprise us that much in light of the news of U.S. government cutting funding to nonprofit organizations that somehow channel their money to the Vatican and to Catholic organizations from grants from the government directly, which then give cuts to the U.S. bishops and then send a cut of that money to the Vatican. It's been estimated that upwards of 80% of Vatican funding in recent years has come from nonprofit organizations and national governments. And the U.S. government is far and away the largest giver of these kinds of funds. So this shouldn't surprise anybody that you would have this politicization going on. But it's especially glaring when the German bishops of all bishops are the ones who are saying this stuff. So we're going to go here to a news story that's kind of a continuation of something I talked about during Holy Week, and I will show you that clip from that live stream here to really kind of make my point. So let's go here to the actual German bishops who give us this headline. The U.S. government has completely misunderstood the gospel. You don't say, German bishops. You don't say. Now, American Catholics would be completely on board with what you're saying. At least the ultra-conservative, traditionalist Catholics would agree. The American government has never really been on the side of the gospel. And most of us who do support the current administration would even admit that they're not exactly the best examples of the gospel, though their recent Holy Week proclamations and things they did during Holy Week were a nice touch. It was nice to see them recognize Christ. But as a general rule, the U.S. government has never been an exemplar of gospel values. It's never been an organization that represents Jesus Christ at all. And that's not fine, but it's what we've come to expect. But I get the distinct feeling, in fact, I know for a fact, that when they talk about the gospel, these German bishops, they're talking about a different gospel than you or I would probably talk about. They're talking about their false gospel of modernism. And so here is what they have to say, because this is incredible. From the article, quote, the U.S. State Department officials are now required to report anti-Christian bias among colleagues. This news rightly caused shock. Directive raises uneasy suspicions. What a disturbing directive. U.S. State Department employees are supposed to anonymously report anti-Christian bias among colleagues. It's only understandable that many American diplomats are shocked as this order sows seeds of mistrust. We've become accustomed to strange and unusual decrees from U.S. President Donald Trump and his ministers, especially in recent weeks. Religious references that are foreign to most Europeans are also not uncommon, such as the view of evangelical Christians that Trump is an instrument of God because he narrowly survived an attempt to remove him in July 2024. These ideas have little to do with fundamental Christian values such as solidarity, compassion, and justice, considering the treatment of migrants or the snub of the president of that country in that war in Eastern Europe. The directive from the U.S. State Department fits in with this and raises the uneasy suspicion that the government in Washington wants to instrumentalize religious issues primarily for its own purposes. And then it goes on to compare him to big bad dictators in the East. And he says this, whoever issued this directive in the United States has clearly completely misunderstood the gospel. Anonymously denouncing those who think differently has absolutely nothing to do with the Christian message of the Sermon on the Mount or with charity. Even properly understood freedom of belief and religion, a sign of tolerance, looks different. Whether someone is suitable for the U.S. diplomatic service should not depend on their stance toward a denomination or religion. Other criteria must apply for qualification. End quote. That's pretty rich. That is very rich coming from these guys. And it doesn't surprise me. Even though there had been a bias against Christians in the previous administration, and going back well before that, against Christians. It had been demonstrable. We're talking about the same people who put federal police in the pews of our parishes to keep an eye on all those rad trads because they thought they were some sort of potential threat or something. That is what we're talking about here. And this is in the broader scope of things going on. And I touched on this in a live stream during Holy Week. Many of you didn't see it because it was Holy Week. But there was other news of politicization like this. So let's go check on that clip here for some unbelievable hot takes from American bishops that are right in line with this. The bishops in all of this, while this is happening, this is a political event during Holy Week involving demonic practices. So again, Holy Week, they just did this. Okay, it's Maundy Thursday. This happened this week. Now, the bishops have also taken the opportunity to politicize everything in the church these days. This is kind of a broader trend. I have a story for you in the coming days of an auxiliary bishop of Washington, D.C. being used to denounce the current president. Here is a preview of that for to motivate you to pray. This comes from America Magazine under the headline, Bishop Menjivar, Migrants and Refugees Are Living Christ's Passion Today. Right. Not much is said in here, in his article in America Magazine about how those harmed by these same military-age men who entered the country illicitly are themselves living Christ's passion. Their suffering is expected to be taken on the chin and bore with stoic resolve because the work of changing America into progressive dictatorship must continue. And the certain elements of the human element within the hierarchy of the church are fully on board this. Fully on board. Bishop Menjivar, I'm not going to give you the whole thing here, but it's worth going over. Here's what he had to say in a Holy Week message. The church remembers Christ's suffering, death, and resurrection of Jesus in a spiritual and sacramental way during Holy Week and the Easter Triduum, but some people actually experience the Passion in a tangible and personal way in their very lives. Among them are members of the immigrant and refugee communities today. Each day, this situation is getting worse and more ominous. For weeks now, the federal government has pursued a shock and awe campaign of aggressive threats and highly visible operations of questionable legality that go far beyond mere immigration enforcement. Cardinal Robert McElroy, painting him to be a hero, but that's because this bishop writing this is McElroy's auxiliary, meaning assistant bishop. He has bluntly called this unfolding misery and justice a war of fear, and it is. In fact, it could be said that this war is Christ's passion in us, which is how spiritual author Carol Houselander described the experience of the English people during World War II in her book, This War is the Passion. And as with Jesus in the garden and after his arrest, this suffering includes not only the wounds inflicted upon migrants and refugees by the government, but the lack of noticeable support by people they consider to be friends. Many fear this crisis will lead only to ruin. But there is one thing in our lives that is not endangered and in which we can take hope, and that is the ongoing presence of Jesus, the risen Lord, among us. In that knowledge, Houselander added in her book, we can face the war in his spirit. This includes offering up these trials and worries to our Redeemer, and also completing in ourselves what is lacking in his afflictions, as St. Paul did. In the gospel mystery of human suffering, where Jesus, the crucified one, comes to meet us and take our adversity upon himself. We can carry our share of the cross as a loving work for each other to help our common redemption, urged Houselander. Yet while redemptive suffering is a grace, it would be better still if these injustices and infamies did not happen at all. This is why we need to speak up as St. Oscar Romero did, and as Cardinal McElroy emphasized at a recent information session on this current crisis for parish and ministerial leaders. We must stand with those at risk, the Cardinal said. We cannot let the dark side of anti-immigrant animus take hold. End quote. It's kind of, I think, unsettling, to say the least, to have the gospel politicized like that, and then have Lent and Easter turned into a blunt force instrument for which to score cheap political points against the administration in perfect alignment with the media and with the Democratic Party. And even the enforcement of American laws being compared to the Blitz of World War II. The modernists have no shame. That is how important all of this is to them. Remember, the specter of money looms over this. If you're just now seeing this because you've been tuning out of news for most of Lent or for all of Lent, during the penitential season, story after story after story emerged of the bishops being primarily concerned with money, and they tied it to politics. They tried to sell you on the idea that your Lenten almsgiving should be to Catholic relief services and Catholic charities to make up for the budget shortfalls they suddenly were facing because the administration stopped funding their subversion of the country. They had no shame in this, and it appears that they've learned nothing. None of that should surprise you. None of it. Do you see how all this fits together? This is becoming an orchestrated attempt by the bishops to paint the American government as the great evil in the world today. They're working with the secular authorities who are we'll say the secular powers that have recently lost all these elections across the West to paint the pushback against their programs as being of Antichrist. That's what they're doing. I don't think these guys actually believe in the Antichrist, but whatever. I'm curious what you have to say about this. So let me know in the comments, please. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It certainly helps. Sharing this on social media helps too. And if you've ever thought about supporting the work of Return to Tradition through Patreon or Subscribestar or that join button below, it does help keep these daily messages coming. Viewers like you asked for all the options we have, so go ahead and check them out, and it is greatly appreciated. And as always, pray for the church. I am Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.